I like to, a lot of people brought up ideas. I know with the star, we talked about it too. But I think even with the Wheel of Fortune, that idea of a sort of detachment. I think someone said detached engagement at one point. I really liked that. And a couple other similar ideas. And, it reminded me, and when John was going through his information and talked about those meditations and that idea of becoming aware of who is the observer. I think you can find a lot of that, particularly in the Wheel of Fortune and the star card as well, in that idea of who is the observer and kind of letting go of some of the attachment of that experience that we see with the star card for sure.
Welcome everybody to this co-production of the Denver Tarot Geeks and the Greater Seattle Tarot Meetup. I'm Joy Vernon, and our hosts today are myself and John Allen and Penny Ozinga. Today we are doing the alchemical stage of separation. And so we're going to do our same format that we did last time, and I think the time before, which actually worked really nicely. We've been really happy with this. Hauck, in one of his many websites, talks about the idea of the difference between lunar state of mind, a solar state of mind, and a stellar state of mind. And the lunar state of mind is a receptive one, that it's not analytical. It's just like letting stuff wash over you. The solar state of mind is much more logical and analytical and trying to fact gather and seek to understand. And then the stellar stage is integrative of both of those. And so to that effect, we'll start the meetup with a silent slideshow of alchemical images, and just again let the experience just kind of blow through you, and just let it pass through you without any judgment, without any analysis. And then after that we'll go into, and I'll be leading that this time. Then John will go into a fact-gathering foray with you, and then Penny will do the integrative stellar part, where we integrate the cards and their images into the information that we've learned today. Okay, we're going to go into the Lectio Divina Oratio section, which is the divine reading or study. And we're starting the observation, the earlier steps are kind of what we've already done. So we'll start with, we've got two images. We'll start with silent observation. What do you see or observe in this image? How does it make you feel? What's your experience? Using just one word or a short phrase, speak your response out loud. There's no discussion, just a free flow of short responses among participants. Anyone can speak at any time. Try to wait for a pause, but it's natural and part of the experience if some responses overlap. You can share more than one response. Repeating another person's response is fine if you also feel the same way. We'll look at two images each for 2 minutes. Take some time to observe, then when you're ready, share your phrase or word.
Conflict.
Crowned victor.
Beautiful.
Trapped.
Chaotic.
The womb of life.
Ice.
Pressure.
Controversy.
Intentional complexity.
The chariot.
Teardrop.
Drawn to the distance.
Striving.
Revealing.
All
Three heads.
elements. Fight for knowledge.
Fear. Ears. Pluto in Aquarius.
Mona Lisa.
Suffering.
There.
Fall.
Cold.
Flow.
Drifting.
Emotion.
Makes me smile.
Letting go.
Patterns.
Chili.
Surrender.
Discarding.
Death.
Cycles.
Vortex.
Movement.
Cleansing, reaving.
Dispersal.
Angels.
Windy.
Air.
Ease.
Blood drop.
Flight.
Purification.
Scattering.
Free.
Being in the cycle.
Being free.
Surrender.
An eclipse.
Stability.
Fingers.
Upward.
Release.
Vortex.
Composition.
Outgrowing.
Death. Moving on.
Change. Spirit.
And now I'll take just a few seconds of silence. Okay, that was our experience, and we're not going to analyze it or anything. So I'm going to go straight over to John.
Hello, everyone. And so what we're going to move on to now, as we've just experienced the lunar aspects of things, we're going to be doing the solar aspects, which is going to be a little more fact gathering. So what I will do, and we'll show you this handout, and we'll just go through it, and then afterwards I will post it into the chat room so everyone can upload it. So don't worry if you don't catch something the first time around, because all that information will be coming to you. We'll just first off start with a basic definition of what separation is. And it is an operation which is ruled by the element air, where previously we had the operations of calcination ruled by fire and dissolution ruled by water. This is also the beginning of what alchemists call the albedo, or the white phase. We've just passed through the first two operations, which are constitute the blackening, or the grado. And here, with the whitening, is an operation which is geared toward purification of what we have. The basic gist of this is we are defining opposite equal components of soul, spirit, and body, which previously were all mingled together. Now we have them separated into their respective containers, so to speak. One definition that William Hauck has put here, and I quote, "The classification and analysis of material previously hidden by the rational mind to extract a person's essence." And this is where we get a good view of soul and spirit, whereas before we were concentrating mostly on eliminating the salts from the equation with the previous two operations. And here we get a better view of what soul and spirit constitutes in us. So here, one of the ways that is identifying with the soul and spirit in terms of how to identify it most readily is through our feelings and our thoughts, whereas soul is most directly expressed through feelings, spirit through our thoughts. So one is more of an intuitive state of being, and the other is more of an intellectual. And that's just basically under the very, very immediate experience of them, which of course it goes much deeper than that. In the chemical operations, so it's basically it is the isolation of the desired components left from calcination and dissolution by various operations, the most common being distillation and filtration, which is passing something through a paper or a mesh filter, and discarding whatever is caught by that filtration process. Now, other methods would include cutting, skimming, setting, sifting, and also agitation with air. And I believe, the agitation with air and the distillation aspects of it do relate directly to the element of air. Psychologically, it is we are basically taking a tally of our own personalities, and we're deciding what it is we want to discard from our personalities, or what do we want to reintegrate into our refined personalities. Essentially, psychology is almost like taking the machine apart and identifying all of its little components and making sure all of those components are nice and squeaky clean before we reassemble the machine. Just quickly wanted to also just emphasize these three particular components in terms of correspondence to this particular operation. We already mentioned air already. It is mentioned in the emerald tablet in the line, the wind carries it in its belly, which is the application of the air element, which is our ascending and purifying operations. Air is related to, it's equated to the essence of life, the life force, prana, chi, other kinds of it arose by any other name. Basically, life energy is what air was equated to, not just by the alchemists, but also by a lot of esotericists. Two other correspondences, which we'll get into a little more detail. We have iron and Mars that are associated with this particular operation. Now, with an iron in the equation, Hauck speaks about the iron temperament, which we're going to get into a little bit more. These are, qualities of Mars, most of it, because iron is ruled by Mars. So they share a lot of symbolic qualities about them. However, I wanted to just focus on the ones that are really pertinent to the operation itself, which is the strength and determination and the discernment that is involved with this operation, which is a conscious process. It's something that we are very much engaging our intellect in our analysis and our analytical minds in order to make these decisions as to what is valuable to us in our own person. And just by coincidence, the iron forms steel, which is a strong ally used in most cutting and precision instruments. So anything from a pair of scissors to a tiny screwdriver to anything like maybe even a sword or a bayonet. For Mars, is also a characteristic of the condition that we find our essences once we've identified them, which are in pure but in opposition. So they are depicted to be at war with one another. So, but Mars also stands for other things like our determination, our sense of will, our passion. And it is being willing to fight for what you believe, being the spiritual warrior. Most people who are engaged in the separation process do tend to be, very, very active in their spiritual lives. And it's the spiritization of their lives via the air element as well. And just being able to break all the hopes and appetites that were feeding your previous personality, which is what is been burned away and dissolved. We've gone through some of the imagery already. On some of the previous demonstration, we had images of filters and other kinds of apparatus for achieving separation in the laboratory. Funnels, swords, knives are also potent symbols. White birds taking flight. The black crow is also of the operation of separation, because of the crow is basically a collector and collects nice shiny things. That's kind of what we're looking for. Also, geometric diagrams like the squaring of the circle, like we have here, pictured with the king and queen, and the alchemist here making the measurements that are necessary. So now we'll talk a little bit more about iron and Mars. And like I said before, the symbology are very common to iron and Mars. One thing I wanted to also, kind of point out there was the combination of those particular these components and the air element. One of them is that iron is a key component of hemoglobin in the blood, which is responsible for transporting oxygen throughout the body. On the Mars side, Mars is red because of its abundance of iron oxide, which is basically the same thing. It is iron and oxygen, rust. So we have this very bold connection of air between both iron and Mars. Iron is also, like we said before, it is primarily in steel, and steel is one of the most commonly used metals. It's indeed one of the most abundant metals on Earth, as it is in outer space, because a lot of it rains down on us in the form of meteors. But of the, and in terms of like the more esoteric work, iron is used to invoke strength, determination, energy, willpower, assertion, and aggression. And depending on how it's being used, it can either be a constructive or a destructive force. So in this case, we're trying to transmute that iron temperament that has all of these very, very energetic and various aggressive energies, and channeling it to the more constructive operation of keeping the essences separate but equal. With Mars, in the medieval sense, it was known as the lesser malefic, so it brought a lot of conflict, illnesses, and accidents. Although esoterically, in more evolutionary astrology, it's more of our sense of individuality and our sense of will, which in essence is what we're kind of doing here, is we are extracting our individuality from ourselves, so we can get a very, very careful look at it. Among some of the things that Mars rules, I mean, other than we also will I'll touch a little bit on Aries and Scorpio when we talk about Thema Mundi. It's exalted in Capricorn, and its detriment in the sign of Libra. And in general rulership, it does not only includes things like challenges and daring, but it also, things like opposition and rebellion, dissension, and even splitting came up in the list of things that is ruled by Mars. So it's becomes a little more of an apt symbol for the operation of separation. With the Thema Mundi, which we'll come back to the Aries, which is the first sign of the zodiac, which heralds spring. It's a sign, it's cardinal fire, so it's we full up a lot of get up and go. Aries like to get things done. When they have an idea, they want to just go ahead and implement that. Aries is also associated with leadership qualities, and there's a very strong sense of independence. So in this case, we're also bringing a new renewed personality into being. So this ties in with that idea of spring being The alchemical cipher for separation, however, is the zodiac sign Scorpio, which, I mean, it varies in system to system, but more commonly you will find the sign of Scorpio symbolizing the operation of separation, which happens to be the other sign that is ruled by Mars. So whereas Aries aims high, Scorpio dives deep to go and find that same essence, which we're also doing. We're diving deep into the body to retrieve the soul and spirit. And with the Thema Mundi also, there's those two signs bring the aspect relationship to the axis Mundi itself to 90 degrees, which is a rule, I believe, which is an aspect that's ruled by Mars, because of the very associations of the square rulership, the square aspect, I mean, which is standing for, it usually brings friction and difficulty. Various meditations which can be done. There's one that's mentioned where called Cutting Through Reality, where we focus, on who is aware in meditation, where we identify the observer and the observed. We're basically here meditating upon ourselves, and that's kind of where that separation begins too, where we make the distinction between the meditated and the meditator, and then we realize that we're both of those things. But the gist of it is to carve away everything that is not pure. We're looking for the essence, the meaning behind it all, and remaining objective about what is true and false, rather than subjective. Another meditation is that calls what I call second attention, and I believe this is, he mentions it being very common, a common practice among shaman, where the focus is more on maybe more what's overlooked. You're not, your first attention is just your ordinary awareness, but your second attention is more intuitive, non-judgmental, without an internal dialogue or saying, evaluating what you're seeing, but mainly just observing. And you're observing the essence rather than the substance. There are a few others mentioned there. Again, also, I will post this in the chat room so everyone can get a copy. And then we'll transition here, just say a few words about the tarot before we move on to our next section, where we do look at our grand tableau here. And essentially we're looking at the third column, these three cards, specifically the Star, the Wheel of Fortune, and the Empress. And I did try to focus on some other esoteric aspects of these cards that support the separation process. So with the Star, for example, there's the image of the two jugs. That is a symbol of separation there. Another thing you can look about with the Wheel of Fortune is that a centrifuge is an instrument of separation, where it's using centrifugal force usually to separate fluids, but the aim is the same. And there's also with say with the Empress, that she is Dalet, or the door, the transition from the one into the many, which is itself a creative act of separation. but she also governs the root back from the many into the one. So she sort of plants the seeds for the next operation, which is conjunction, with the reunification of the separate components. With some other cards we could consider, we can consider the Tower, that's association with Mars and iron. The Emperor for Aries, which is ruled by Mars, could be pertinent. The Death card is ruled by Scorpio, ruled by Mars. And cards like the Justice card, or even the Ace of Swords, because of their the sword imagery and the cutting implements and its association with the element of air. Are there any questions about what we covered in a admittedly a bit whirlwind way?
Well, I just want to say that was great, John, and I really like the handout.
I did not have time to make a separate slideshow for that, unfortunately, but
No, that was perfect. Using the handout the way you did was perfect. I liked it.
So it's all clear as a bell, and we're all set to leap on the wild horse that is the stellar perspective of separation, which we will hand over to Penny.
Thank you, John. So the first class, I think it was the first class in the series, we introduced that tableau that you saw at the end of John's handout. And that's kind of the framework that we've been using in our connection with the tarot aspect of this series. So we're going to start by just looking at a quick review of that tableau and how it's set up. And then we will look at those three cards in that column more in depth, the Empress, the Wheel of Fortune, and the Star card. And then after that, we'll kind of bring it back together with those ideas of separation that John brought up, and what's in our minds from the images that Joy showed, and see what we can do through discussion to kind of make some connections between those cards and that actual process of alchemical separation. I want to mention, while we're looking at these images and talking about the keywords and placements, keep in mind that this system, the tableau itself, was developed by this specific tableau, Paul Foster Case. So a lot of the attributions that are mentioned are within that framework. But I don't want to by any means, say that this is like the be all end all of that symbolism. In fact, I think we can use it to as more of a stepping stone and kind of encourage just discussion, use our own associations that we have, our own experiences with these cards, in addition to kind of this traditional symbolism that I'll present. Okay, so the tarot tableau that was developed by Paul Case. So you can see that there's 3 rows of 7 with our Fool card representing the prima materia on top. The top horizontal row represents principles or powers, potencies. Sometimes he likened them to mental states. And so each of those has their own designation, concentration, memory, imagination, etc. So kind of mental faculties or powers. The second horizontal row is more the agencies or vehicles through which those powers would operate. So suggestion or rotation, the idea of reversal, etc. And then our final row is kind of considered more the phenomena or the conditions that would result from that power principle moving through that agency or vehicle. Vertically, these 7 columns do correspond to the 7 alchemical stages that we've been talking about. And so, as you know, today we're talking about separation, our 3rd row. So we'll be looking at that idea of the principle or potency of the power of imagination with the Empress. through the vehicle of rotation or cyclic activity of the Wheel of Fortune, and then sort of that phenomena or condition or effect that is then stimulated or activated, in this case, the power of revelation. He calls them unfoldments, just kind of that idea that these are things within everyone at all times, and it's that idea of unfolding it or uncovering it through that process. So starting with the Empress card, I pulled together a few images on the left that have to do with some of the general keywords. A few John mentioned at the end of his presentation as well. I was thinking I'll go ahead and read the Case and Davies keywords, but then I'd kind of like to hear from other people what your thoughts are on this card. Right now, we're just kind of looking at the imagery and the associations with the card, and then in a few minutes, we'll bring it back around to separation. And so with the Empress, there is an association with the goddess Venus, also Hathor, the Egyptian Hathor, which we'll actually see as a theme through all three of these cards. Hathor being Egyptian goddess, similar to Venus, over music and agriculture and all things maternal. So Venus the goddess and Venus the planet. The power of imagination and creativity, the idea of germination and generating of ideas into forms, abundance, fruition, nature and growth, fertility, the womb or the birth canal, passages and portals, and a lot of that comes from that Hebrew letter dalet or door, as well as the birth canal, the creating of the manifest, and more importantly, the actual preservation of that. Making forms from the stored memories or patterns of experience, which is what comes from the High Priestess in that series. Venus or the Empress is on the east side of the cube of space and also corresponds to sunrise. It's connection through the sensorial. So there's a lot of sensory connections with this as well. The Hebrew letter dalet, which means a door or a portal, also means safekeeping, preservation, and passage. And then on the Tree of Life, this is the 24th path or the luminous intelligence between the second sphere of Chokmah and the third sphere of Binah. And she is that path that runs between them where we see the undifferentiated life force or energy of Chokmah meeting the archetype of form or the grand womb of Binah. So now that we've kind of reviewed some of those things, I guess I'd like to hear from anyone that wants to share some of your ideas of what this card means to you, either experientially or just as you look upon it. I'm guessing some of these things might coincide with what we've talked about, but if you have something else you'd like to add or something, a picture on the left, you know, whether it's the Venusian, the idea of the canals, the doors, what does this card mean to you?
I would say the door on the left helps resonate the most. I feel like the Empress card is welcoming you to take you on that next step, but you can't just walk through it, like you have to kind of work for it a little bit.
Yeah, I like the idea of welcoming you, how you put that. That's nice.
This card also makes me think about like when the Empress being in this association with birth and rebirth and, you know, sowing of seeds and all that kind of thing, that there's this, this line of like even genetic material that comes down, comes through us from generation to generation. So there's this continuity that comes through the Empress that ties us all together in a way. And John said something about it, I'm not gonna be able to find that right now, but the Empress roots us back from many to the one. So that's kind of that idea that I'm going for, but it comes through us very specifically in our genetic material and how we're actually connected physically.
Yeah, thank you, Eleanor. Okay, so key 10, the Wheel of Fortune. The connection with the goddess Hathor here is you can see around the wheel the letters T, A, R, and O. So different permutations of that. Rota, Taro, Orat, Tora, Ator, which is the Wheel of Tarot, speaks the law of Hathor, the goddess Hathor that we talked about before. So we have ideas of change and flux, cycles and cyclical activity, rotation and revolution, spiraling energy. So that's one important thing we can remember with this card is it's not just spinning for spinning sake. It's an actual spiraling and upwards ascending energy. Positioning and orientation, synchronization and universal consciousness, sequence and progression, evolution and involution. On the cube of space, it's the western face and also corresponds to sunset. So we have both sunrise and sunset represented in this column. Represents a turning point. It's the Hebrew letter Kaf, which is an open or grasping hand or palm, and is considered a container, corresponds to the act of receiving or reception and comprehension. And it's the 21st path on the tree of life, the rewarding intelligence between Chesed and Geburah. Wait, did I do that right? Where the idea of expansion and growth meet the fiery desire nature. So any comments or thoughts or ideas on either the correspondences here or something that you have personally relevant for you on the Wheel of Fortune? I know sometimes this is a card that can sometimes be harder for people to connect to, I think, but I'm curious if any of you have thoughts on that.
I kind of think it's about choices in your progression, whether you're going to decide to stay where you are or continue on the path that you're on.
Yeah, for sure.
I also think it's a reminder that any state is temporary.
Very good. Yeah. Yeah, I should put that on there. Thank you. Yeah, that kind of change is the only permanent thing, right?
Yes.
I also think there's an interesting connection with the word fortune in terms of, I think how people think of it now is that fortune is like something that like you can make your fortune, right? So you can will your fortune into being. And so there's this kind of very, what I think of as sort of a very American trait of like, I'm going to do it and it's all up to me and everything happens because of me. And then there's this other side of fortune that's like this, it's like the luck of the draw, or it's the, it's uncontrolled, so I think there's this sort of interesting dynamic between that word and the two sort of ways you can look at that word of saying like, like I might say I'm very fortunate, but part of that is because of things that I didn't make happen, like I had really nice parents, for example. So I'm fortunate that I had these really nice parents, but I didn't do anything to make my parents nice. They were just nice, So I just think it's an interesting dynamic between those two things, and maybe relates a little bit to that, what John was saying about how in this process of separation, we're pulling out our personality to see what parts of our personality we really want to keep and those that we want to discard.
Yeah, and it is interesting that, traditionally it is the Wheel of Fortune, it's not the Wheel of Change or just the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
The addition of that word fortune, there's obviously a nuance there that lends. to the meaning.
I've got a question on that as far as fortune goes. In my mind's eye, fortune is what's going to happen to you. That's your future. I think we put fortune as something that's necessarily good. So I feel it's more like the wheel of change, and that could be something where you're going into maybe a winter cycle versus a summer cycle. But I feel that people look at it and say, you know, I can't, for every time I see that Wheel of Fortune, it reminds me of that stupid game show, you know, where you're going to get these prizes and that. So I think people see this as maybe not like the turn of the seasons as in our turn of our life, but something that all of a sudden something's good's going to happen, because the word fortune in our minds is that, versus I think more the historical meaning of your change or the way your life is going to go. That is your fortune, good or bad. That's my sort of take on it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I think the word comes from like fortuitous or something, like, you know, from the, I don't know, 1500s or something, which I think referred to things being like by chance or by accident. So I've always been curious too about the use of that, depending on which way you look at that word.
So for me, I have another aspect. I feel like it's more a karmic as a reflection, right? So you might, like the karma is changing, and karma is movement, right? So you might be more on the receiving. You've done your deeds, now you can just receive, or you've been in the receiving mode and now you need to go back into an action mode. But it's more of a reflective card where now you need to change. The reflection has ended, and now you're going back into the opposite of whichever phase you were in.
Yeah, I think that works really well with the idea of that spiraling energy too. Like you're talking about, you know, as you move through, your karma can change or evolve. And to me, that makes me think of that kind of upward spiraling, that there might be that pattern, but you're at a different layer, you know, just spinning to spin, I guess. Yeah, thank you.
That's kind of how I look at it too. Kind of almost like more like a reward for work well done in a way, but then starting a new process again. So it's kind of like, okay, you can celebrate, or you're going to receive a reward for the work that you've done, but now you have to keep going. It like tells me that I have to keep going.
Yeah, for sure. The rewarding or conciliating intelligence too. Yeah, that John mentioned. Awesome.
And another thing that I'd like to add, for me, it's also a reminder that regardless if you're up or down on the wheel of fortune, it is still fortune. So even in the darkest moments and the abyss, there's an opportunity to find the upward trajectory. And on the contrary, when you're up, it's a reminder that there's always a down. And so you should be grateful and appreciative of what you have right now.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, very good point.
Or maybe not even worry about connotating that, just knowing that it is a cycle, right? We don't have to necessarily be focused, right? That everything is good. Everything just is, and it keeps rotating.
Yeah, it's like learning that non-attachment to that, like you said, it just is. And so there's some help there with not being so attached to every point in time. Yeah. Awesome.
I have a question. I have a question about that. Is that a voucher or the eagle on the right hand side, top right corner?
It's supposed to be an eagle.
The bird.
Yeah, so it's the eagle. So those are the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac. So that is our representation of Scorpio, or fixed water.
Okay.
We've got a comment in the chat of the representation here of the Cardinal Grand Cross, which we actually have coming up here momentarily, with Pluto at the beginning of Aquarius and Jupiter and Mars both about to change signs into Taurus and Leo, and the nodal axis at the beginning of Scorpio Taurus, we have a grand cross in those fixed signs at 0 degrees of those fixed signs right now. And the idea of the stability of the fixed signs against the contrast against the moving of the wheel is a really fascinating thing to think about. It's like change and growth and movement and evolution, but it's within a very stable environment. And so I think that it gives you that this idea of the wheel as change and growth and development of coming into being and going out of being is most effective when it's set against something that some kind of grounding that or foundation that you have to push against.
Yeah, that's super great. And thank you for checking that chat too. And the astrological synchronicity is super cool.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, thank you, Joy. Yeah, I think that actually is a very poignant point, that idea of, well, so one of the key phrases for Key 21, the world, is this idea of liberation through limitation, with its association with Saturn. But there's a lot of tie-in between Key 21 and Key 10, with that same concept, and Joy pointed that out so great, with that idea of those fixed signs and that stability, kind of housing or providing tension for the change or seeming change of the wheel. So I think, yeah, that's a super important point. Okay,
I always take it as a perspective of the tower, but you're looking at it from the top or end of the view versus looking at it from the side. Like you build up, right? Like, as you said, kind of like, how do you get up the tower? You got to walk up there, you got to walk back down. But when you get up there, it's kind of like you are literally trying to find your way to ascension, right? To the ideas of source, which is kind of like the 4 depictions, right? The 4 faces of God, if you will. It's in certain books, I have to look it all up, but the 4 faces of God with the 3, the trifecta, where you have all 3 surrounding the wheel. So what happens when you get up there? You're going to come down some kind of way, right? The way how it goes around comes around type thing. So I always kind of look at it like that.
I'm picturing like those old Renaissance towers, that actually have kind of those spiraling staircases that encircle the perimeter.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move to the star, so we have time to look at our separation with this as well. So again, we have a reference to our goddess Hathor, or Venus, as a Venus unveiled. Revelation, meditation, or fishing for truth, the discovery of secrets and truth, capturing new ideas and inspiration, the meditative focus of solar energy, awareness of the hidden qualities of nature, the vibration of the pool of universal consciousness, the faith or serenity that follows the disruption of the tower, stripping oneself of the limiting structures of certain beliefs. It's the Hebrew letter tzadi, which is a fish hook or a hook, but also is associated with the idea of bait or capture. It's also a reference to the tzaddikim, which is the righteous ones, and therefore humility, and also discovery. It's the natural intelligence, and it is the 21st path on the tree of life, between the 9th sphere of Yesod and the 7th sphere of Netzach. So where in Yesod, where what's called the storehouse of images in the subconscious meets that fiery aspirational energy of Netzach. And then there's images here kind of relating to some of those. So again, in the same way, what are your thoughts on the star card? I know often it's a favorite. So experientially, how do you relate to this card? What other meanings would you give it?
Yeah, I'd like to understand more how it's separation. So I'm sure it is. It's probably obvious. I see the 7 different chakras and the stars, and yeah, if anybody wants to speak more about that.
Yeah, when we get to the next slide, we'll definitely try to make some cohesiveness of that, because I'm there with you. Sometimes it definitely takes some unpacking to see how it can relate. I'm curious what you guys think about, in this particular deck, which is the BOTA deck, her foot is very plainly resting upon the water and upon that vibratory scene. What is your guys' take on that?
This is a very strong, powerful person, even when they're vulnerable. Their work ethic is beyond recall. They can put it together in any kind of which way, no matter which way it falls. This person is extraordinary and almost like too much for those who don't know what true strength is. Once when they see it, once when they feel it, once when they notice it, type of sensational thing, like the most sexiest Aquarian you'd ever see in your life, in some sense. And I'll stop there.
I see engaged detachment because she's not submerged into the water. She is just stating a purpose or stating her own being, but she's not in it. So you have to decide what you want to do. She just gives you the inspiration.
I like that phrase, engaged attachment. That's good.
I also think that it's this really deep connection with the source, with the sun above, the star above, and then the water. There's this connection that's happening that doesn't consume her, but she's just completely a part of it. It's just everything's really lined up, and I really like what the first gentleman said about the strength and everything. I never really thought about it that way, but I really like that. And in the deck that I use most often, this is I don't know if you guys can see it, but this is the card itself, and I just think it's really a really beautiful card. It brings me lots of when I look at it, I feel a real strong sense of hope, and also kind of like everything's going to be okay, because we are really all connected to that energy. Like we're not alone, we're not, to me, it really symbolizes that full recognition that we're not separate, that separation is a lie. And I feel like she really embodies that, that part, being in the oneness,
Yeah.
For me, and I'm going to tag along here, but for me, she is a significator of forgiveness, because she realizes that whichever way the river of life flows, the destination is always the ocean, and it is the one where all water pools together. So therefore, she has that power to be vulnerable and to forgive what happened in the tower.
Yeah, very nice.
She's also an embodiment of allowing, right? Because, and I love the idea of strength with this card, which I also did not previously type on a conscious level, but there is a stillness and a hope underneath, regardless of how the outside might look, right? I think this is more of an observer or who's the observer and what is being observed type situation, because I almost feel like the outside is not a good representation of the inside. The inside, she knows who she is, and she knows there's that stillness, and she can just allow the chaos. And it kind of relates to the 10, the Wheel of Fortune, right? Because the chaos, the whirlwind, is going around, yet when she chooses, she can be centered and allow that storm to just, or the water to just flow through, knowing that that hook is available for her to go higher whenever that choice is made.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. And I think that also speaks to what Joy mentioned about that stability of those 4 fixed lines as well, but yet being able to use that change effectively as well, right? that spinning motion to actually go somewhere. Yeah. Okay, so I want to make sure Joy has time to look at the reading or the card work we're going to do. So these are just kind of some basic ideas for putting together how to look at that tableau in terms of those three categories. So again, that top row, in this case, the Empress, is the power or a mental faculty or ability. The middle row that the Wheel of Fortune is in is the layer of activity or agency or action. And then the bottom is in the effects or conditions. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, and I'll make sure I send this in the chat after, but remembering too that these three rows also correspond with our sulfur, mercury, and salt levels with our alchemy as well as modes of consciousness, self, super, and subconscious. So one way you can work at it is literally from top to bottom. You know, you could say the Empress symbolizes the power or mental faculty, working through the agency or activity symbolized by key 10 to bring about or activate or modify the effects symbolized in key 17, or the power of our imagination, working through cyclic activity and the law of rotation, facilitates or activates revelation and the unveiling of natural forces. You could reverse that and start with the star card. The experience of revelation leads to the activity of spiral activity or ascension, thereby opening up the power of true or divine imagination. Looking at this column through modes of consciousness, you could say that the self-conscious aspect or faculty of imagination, which is the Empress, brought through by the superconscious activity of the cyclic or spiral rotation of the Wheel of Fortune, would facilitate the revelation or illumination at the subconscious level. And then in reverse, same thing, the revelation that's disclosed to the subconsciousness aligned with the activity or intention of the superconsciousness awards one with the creative or germinating imagination of in self-consciousness. So I know that was a mouthful, but those are just kind of a few different ways that you can look at the tableau and kind of work with those different layers of consciousness and activity. So taking that and everything we talked about with the three cards specifically, we'll spend the last couple minutes seeing what we can do with separation. So just a quick review of what John went over. The purpose of separation is the classification and analysis of previously hidden material by the rational mind to extract a person's essence. Dissecting and discarding what is no longer useful or relevant is the goal of the separation process. It is the first coming together of soul and spirit, and this newly acquired vantage point allows one the discernment to decide what is worthy of being saved after the previous operations. So now that we've kind of had a little while to think about separation, to think about these cards, how do you guys feel about connecting these to that alchemical process of separation? What are you finding there, either individually, as a trio? What connections can we make?
I think the star really speaks to become awareness itself. To me, that's the connection for separation and the star.
Do you have more that you want to say on that, or?
Just what I spoke about earlier, like being aware that regardless of what happens, it all ends in the same place. It all ends to source, comes from source, ends to source. And awareness itself is like a realization of that, the fact that there's two opposing forces, but they're technically the same thing.
Right.
And that's what the star tells us.
Yeah.
It's the reconciliation of like, okay, we are separated, but I am aware that the separation is an illusion.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and someone mentioned earlier too, I don't remember which card we were looking at, but about the lie of separation. that we all go through as well. And I think, what we talked about with the Empress being kind of that door that goes in or out, all of these do kind of have some kind of truth hidden about this idea that, separation is an appearance and not necessarily an end all state.
The mantra that's come through me here is separation is sustenance. I think just the story of seeing the Empress, like it's clear she can't hold on. She's going to have that baby. And then with the fixed signs in the Wheel of Fortune, like the how well do we accept that we're in a dualistic place, a changing place? How well can we deal with and move through our desire, our want maybe to hold on to what we are and who we've known, to get to this star. And like it's just so contrasting of the Empress just so full and in this gown, and then the star, she's naked. Like what's happened when you let go and then you get to just be there in this more like receptive state. Yeah, I don't know. I love it. I love seeing these 3 cards tell a story to me like that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was awesome. Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a story for sure. I like to, a lot of people brought up ideas. I know with the star, we talked about it too. But I think even with the Wheel of Fortune, that idea of a sort of detachment. I think someone said detached engagement at one point. I really liked that. And a couple other similar ideas. And, it reminded me, and when John was going through his information and talked about those meditations and that idea of becoming aware of who is the observer. I think you can find a lot of that, particularly in the Wheel of Fortune and the star card as well, in that idea of who is the observer, and kind of letting go of some of the attachment of that experience that we see with the star card for sure. Do you guys find that connection?
Yeah, Penny, I totally agree with how you're looking at that. And I wanted to take a stab at it myself with some ideas I had in terms of one, kind of riffing off what you were saying. How does describe the idea of separating from the body? I think the Empress is very body oriented. As Venus, she rules Taurus. She's in a field of wheat. She, her body is that vessel for the child. She's very tangible and physical. And and the star is very spiritual and very much connected. Even if you look at like the Thoth star, where she's not even on the ground at all, she's above, pouring out the energy of the soul, that stellar energy down from above. And I think that one of the things with separation is that kind of first contact with the idea of the non-corporeal, but it's not integrating the non-corporeal into the physical. That comes at a much later stage. And so the star card is separation, in that she is recognizing the spiritual component, but not quite being able to integrate it, not quite being able to bring it together.
She's just tempering it.
Yeah, you could say that. And so from the Empress through our cycle, we get the physical body, we get this change or transition with the wheel into the star, which is that spiritual essence, or that out of body experience, even the spiritual recognition or realization. And I think one of the things that I find to be true with this is it sets up a yearning or a strong desire for more of that spiritual essence, but we're not able to integrate it and have it all the time and have it one with our body. So at this stage of separation, we recognize that there's more and we yearn for that, but we don't always achieve it.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It kind of made me realize too how much that Wheel of Fortune card between the Empress and the Star card is really kind of that fulcrum, like you said, between like the physical and spiritual experience of that connection or separation. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Joy, for that as well. I'm gonna, before we move to our card work, was there any last epiphanies on separation or Empresses or Wheel of Fortunes or what have you before we hand it back off to Joy?
I will ask a question because I'm new to this and loving it. And I thought that was so interesting. All three of those cards with their astrological correspondences to the fixed signs. So in the tableau, is that typical for each 3 rows to have that kind of significance? Like as one row cardinal? No.
Yeah, no, not necessarily. So like the first 2 columns that we looked at, the first one, calcination, we had the Magician, which is Mercury, and then the Strength card, which is Leo, and then the Devil card, which is Capricorn. So you don't always see, you know, that kind of matchup. But often I feel like, at least whenever I look, there's always something to find, some kind of connection.
So fun. All right, cool.
Well, thanks, guys. That was some really great ideas and sharing that you had on those cards. Thanks so much.
So we're going to do, this is the same process that we did last time, and it was slightly easier than some of the other things that we did, and lets us get it done in the time allotted. So the first thing that you're going to do is make sure you got a tarot deck with you and also some note-taking materials. And then you're going to pull out our 3 cards that we've been talking about from the 7x3 table, which is the Empress, the Wheel of Fortune, and the Star. And so get those laid out where you can see them. And we're going to be working with some of the ideas that Oswald Wirth uses when talking about the 7x3 table. And he has a very simple process for describing the 3 layers, the 3 horizontal rows, as the subject at the top, the verb in the middle, and the object at the bottom. And so as we did last time, we're going to look at these 3 cards, the Empress, the Wheel, and the Star, as subject, verb, and object. So take a minute or so and grab a pen and paper or your notes app or whatever you've got and start jotting down some ideas. What does this Empress symbolize for you in terms, how is she a subject? How is she something that's going to take an action? Think about that and think how you would characterize her. And so, you know, I might think of the Empress as creativity. That's one of my favorite keywords for her. And so that would be the subject. And so then same thing with the next card, the Wheel of Fortune, you're going to look at how that's a verb. And so again, change, transition, coming into being, those are definitely some of the main keywords that I use that are verbs to go with the Wheel of Fortune. But of course, I encourage you to spend time with this and find what's best for you. And then the Star is the object. So the Empress is taking this Wheel of Fortune action on or about or for the object, which is going to be the Star. And so again, you can find a word for that Star card that is going to be the object of the sentence. And so meditation is a good one. So I could put that sentence together then and say that the Empress, my creativity, has a verb, Wheel of Fortune, coming into being, and then my star object, meditation. My creativity comes into being through meditation, and that is actually true for me. And so that's your first step, and I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. So feel free to take as long as you like for this, but I'm going to go on to each step because we are on we are timed. So once you've got your sentence, and remember at the very beginning in the first session that we did for our Tarot and Alchemy series, we talked about the thing that we wanted to change. And so think about that. And if you haven't been with us from the beginning, go ahead and come up with something right now. If you know something about yourself that you want to change, or even just pull a random card to get the tarot's advice on what this might be, or the tarot suggestion on what this might be for you. But however you do it, think about this thing that you want to transform in your life, this thing that you want to alchemically transform. And so, and I thought, when we talked about this at the beginning, I suggested there's something that you want to change, and then the result that you want to achieve. Two things. We're now, the first two are calcination and dissolution stages. We're both blackening stages, and now we're starting to get into the whitening stages. And it occurred to me, I only picked 2 cards for us. So I think we're kind of more towards the thing that you want to change, the first idea, as opposed to the thing you want to be. But it also, I think, very much is, as the whitening stage, it's in between. It's like, how do I get from the thing that I want to change to the thing that I want to be? And so this stage is kind of linking. It's kind of linking. This session and the next session will be things that are kind of linking from the thing you want to change to the thing you want to be. So kind of keep that in mind as best you can as you think about this. And I didn't even write that in the handout because I recognized when I was jotting these ideas down in the handout, I'm like, this isn't quite right, but I hadn't come up with the solution yet, which I was able to do later on. So now thinking about the thing that you want to change, and thinking that we're starting to get into the process for changing it. Look at your Empress word or phrase that you came up with. So for me, it was creativity. And now you're going to shuffle your deck and choose a card to represent that. And this card is going to be, what does this creativity, what does it actually mean for me? What does it mean in my life? How is this appearing in my life? And you can kind of play with that a little bit to make the most sense to you. But the idea is that we are trying to get the tarot's wisdom on how this is actually showing up in your life right now. So focusing on the first one first, and pull a card for that. Concentrating on the word or phrase you came up with for the Empress. And then go ahead to the next one, the Wheel of Fortune, which was our verb. I chose the phrase comes into being. You have your phrase that you chose. Concentrate on that phrase and pull your card. Again, how is this showing up in my life for me? I love my cards. They always show me the astrological transits that I'm dealing with. Okay, and so then the third one, the star card in your phrase, and this was the object of the sentence. For me, it was meditation. How is this showing up in my life for me? And you'll notice, of course, that I don't pull, just like cut the deck and pull the top 3 cards or anything like that. I want to be able to concentrate and have a clear focus on each one of these things before I pull the card, just my way of doing it. So now you've got a 3-card spread that is based on this sentence that you came up with. It's based on your subject, verb, and object. And so the next thing we're going to do, and again, we're not going to spend a long time on it, but you're welcome to work more later on your own, is start jotting down some interpretations and just think about these cards and how does this first card here represent whatever my keyword was for the Empress. So for me, I've got the 8 of Cups in the Liberty Tarot, which is one of the 8 of Cups generally is a favorite card, and does represent the current position of Saturn being right on top of my midheaven. So it's like, how is my creativity? How is this expressing my creativity for me right now? And that gives me plenty of food for thought. And then again, you'll be looking at your card and your word or phrase that you came up with. Jot down some ideas for each of those cards. Once you've spent some time coming up with your interpretation, you're going to look back at those cards and determine what visual detail in each card most influenced, informed, or inspired the interpretation that you used. So for me, I have to admit that I was visualizing a different set of cards than what I actually pulled, because I was trying to do it very quickly. So for 8 of Cups, I actually visualized the guy walking away, and that was, and so I'm like, my creativity, I really do need to be alone or apart from others. That really helps me a lot. And so that's what it meant for me. And so, and this card doesn't actually show quite that, so I might have to play with it. But that would be an example of a visual cue, is walking away. And then for my Wheel of Fortune card that I said was coming into being, how does it apply to me? I got the High Priestess in the Liberty Tarot. And so, and again, I'm not even playing by my own rules because I was trying to do it quickly. And so I actually thought of, frequently with the High Priestess, I think of the subconscious and planting seeds in the subconscious, and that helps things come into being. And so that is actually the phrase that I thought of, although this High Priestess does have little things growing down by her feet. And so I could definitely say something growing would work for that. And so on with the third card, again, find a little visual cue, a visual detail in each card that embodies the interpretation that you made. And then what you'll do is you'll look through your deck trying to find one card that has all 3 cues on it. And I don't know if I'll be able to find one very quickly. Oh, yeah, this works. So this is the Liberty Hermit, and the Hermit is walking away, is walking towards his egg, there is the idea of something growing. There's both the sperm and the egg itself. Either of those could be representing something growing. And then the star, I didn't go that far, but with that diamond shaped lamp, that certainly is star imagery. So this to me could very easily be my synthesis. This is called the synthesis card. It's a synthesis because it has the 3 visual cues in it that I found in my 3 cards. And that synthesis card is going to represent your alchemical transformation for the separation stage. It reveals your personal process or your unique path to achieve the alchemical operation of separation. And so far, just doing like a 10-minute version of this, that definitely is fitting for me and working for me based on my original sentence. And what I want to what I want to work on changing. So hopefully that makes sense. And with the handout this time, you're able to remember what I said and can work on it on your own later on. Any thoughts or questions?
I have something I'll share.
Yeah.
So the third card I drew to represent the object. So I chose the power of manifestation my power of manifestation is activated via when I'm inspired, right?
Yeah.
So using inspiration instead of meditation. And so I drew the 3 of Swords, which, as you know, is my actual birthday decan card as Saturn in Libra. And for years, I always got the 3 of Swords, and it was like so appropriate for me in my life. And now I never ever get it anymore. And so when it came up, I was like, what? But then all of a sudden, like within one instant, I had this total paradigm shift of how to look at that card. And instead of seeing it as this, like, the typical like heartache and, I saw it as, no, if Swords is air, or like the mental plane, ideas, communication, and then there's the heart, it's like all of a sudden I saw it as like ideas and inspiration is literally being injected into my heart. And it became this like cool thing. And so I was like, oh, well, that just happened. So that was awesome.
I love it. That is amazing.
So I guess that's how I'm inspired, is I get like little injections in my heart.
That's great. Like adrenaline and
Like in Pulp Fiction.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking of. Yes.
Oh my God. Totally. So if you see me with like a little Sharpie mark on my chest next month, you'll know.
I also have something very interesting. So my synthesis card, which I really had a hard time coming up with it. But when I saw it, I knew it was it, because it's the Princess of Wands.
Yeah.
And after a while, for May, for my annual spread, the card for May is Sister Fire in a different deck, which is also the Princess of Wands. So I'm just kind of taking it all in right now.
Oh, excellent. Good.
The message
Nice.
seems to be very strong.
Yes, it does. I love that. Love that. And hopefully this is something that you can continue to work with, continue to meditate on, to continue to contemplate and work with this idea of separation, and your personal synthesis card that expresses how this separation can occur for you in your life, so that you can make these changes and reach the goals that you have. And so keep on meditating with it, processing it, gazing at it, put it on your altar, whatever you want to do. Between now and our next meeting in June. where we will be doing conjunction in the planet Venus, and the metal copper and whatever our other symbols are. John or Penny, do you have anything else that you want to say to sum up or to close down for today?
Well, one cool thing is we'll be able to kind of bridge some of that Venusian stuff with conjunction in our talks today with the Empress and a little bit with the star as well, and those connections with Venus or Hathor. And so we'll kind of be able to leapfrog off that. So that'd be neat.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was noticing that too. I was like, man, we're really leading up nicely into that.
Setting up for success. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for coming and participating.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you so
Oh,
much.
thanks. Thank you.